Pastor Daniel wasn't looking for love. Not there, not in that broken part of town where souls were forgotten and hope had a price. But that's where he met her, Amanda. Her eyes, once dull from years of addiction, carried the faintest light of someone still fighting to be free. He didn't see her past, he saw her battle. Every Thursday night, Daniel led a small outreach group, bringing food, prayer, and music to the streets. That night, when Amanda approached, trembling and ashamed, he simply smiled. "You don't have to run anymore," he told her, and for the first time in years, she believed it. That night marked the start of something neither of them understood yet. Grace wrapped in human form. Weeks turned into months. Amanda joined the church's recovery program, attended every meeting, and began to rebuild her life. Daniel became her mentor, her friend, her safe place. The congregation admired his compassion. At first, they called him the shepherd who goes where others won't. But whispers have a way of spreading faster than grace ever can. Some said he was getting too close. Others accused him of crossing boundaries. Daniel ignored them, focused on her healing, her faith, her laughter slowly returning. He saw what God could do through love, untainted by judgment. What he didn't see was that his compassion was quietly becoming a scandal. When Amanda completed the recovery program, Daniel hugged her in front of the entire congregation. It was meant as celebration, not sin. But in that embrace, some saw what they wanted to see. A rumor was born, a story that would soon grow legs of its own and turn the church he loved into a place he would no longer recognize. Amanda's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The same woman who once wandered through the streets in rags was now leading worship with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. Her voice carried a story of resurrection, and people wept when she sang. But not everyone wept for joy. Some whispered that her place on the platform was too soon, that grace had limits, that forgiveness should have a timeline. Daniel stood by her side, not as her savior, but as her witness. He had seen her in her lowest hour, praying through detox and nights of torment. He knew her scars, her guilt, her fight, and he loved her for surviving it. Love, to him, was not rebellion. It was redemption made visible. But for the elders, it was a problem too dangerous to ignore. In quiet meetings behind closed doors, her name was spoken with suspicion. They questioned Daniel's judgment, his boundaries, his purity. They called it pastoral concern, but in truth it was fear. Fear of what it would look like if the pastor loved someone their doctrine would rather forget. Fear that grace, when lived too loudly, might undo their control. Rumors began to seep into the congregation like smoke through cracks. Mothers whispered to their daughters not to get too close to that woman. Men nodded in agreement, pretending concern while savoring the gossip. Every Sunday, Amanda felt the stares, the cold smiles, the unspoken verdicts. But Daniel's gaze never changed. He saw her the same way he did that night on the street, a woman worth saving. One evening, after a long prayer meeting, Daniel confessed what had been growing inside him for months. "Amanda," he said softly, "I love you, not because of who you were, but because of who you are now." She wept, not from fear, but from disbelief that someone like him, a man of faith and honor, could see beauty in someone like her. Their love was quiet at first, hidden, sacred. But in a small town, secrets don't stay buried for long. When the church board found out that the pastor and the former addict were courting, it was treated like a moral emergency. Meetings were called, statements drafted. Every act of kindness Daniel had ever done was suddenly reinterpreted as a cover for sin. By the time Daniel asked Amanda to marry him, the whispers had turned into warnings. "You'll lose everything," a fellow pastor told him, but Daniel smiled as if peace had already found him. "Then maybe," he said, "it's time I lose the things that were never mine to keep." The wedding was small, intimate, almost fragile in its simplicity. A few close friends, Amanda in a plain white dress, Daniel in his old grey suit. No choir, no grand procession, just vows whispered in trembling voices and tears that felt like baptism. For them, it was holy. For the church, it was a scandal wrapped in a ceremony. Word spread faster than their "I do." Within hours, photos appeared on social media. The pastor and the ex-addict, smiling under a wooden arch of wildflowers. Congregation members commented with veiled disapproval. "We must pray for him," they wrote, as if love were a sickness. Others accused Daniel of falling from grace, of ruining his testimony. None of them had been there to see the way her hands shook as she said yes, or how he looked at her like she was proof of God's mercy. By Sunday morning, the church felt colder. People avoided eye contact. A few families left early, others stayed just to watch how Daniel would preach now that he'd crossed the line. He stood behind the pulpit, his voice steady, but eyes heavy. "Grace," he said that morning, "is not beautiful because it's deserved. It's beautiful because it's given." The room was silent, but not in awe, in judgment. Behind closed doors, the elders met again. They used words like inappropriate, disqualification, loss of credibility. They spoke of policy, but not of love. They quoted scripture, but not compassion. Some of them had known Daniel for decades, but now they looked at him as if he were a stranger, contaminating something sacred. Letters were drafted, meetings arranged. They demanded that Daniel step down for a season of reflection. It was meant to sound merciful, but it felt like exile. He refused to apologize for loving someone they wouldn't even sit beside. That defiance, quiet, calm, holy, sealed his fate. That night, Amanda found him sitting on the church steps, still wearing his wedding ring. He smiled faintly and said, "They think love disqualifies me, but maybe love was the only thing that ever qualified me." She sat beside him in silence, resting her head on his shoulder, knowing that the storm had only just begun. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening, in the same room where Daniel had once prayed with broken men and women seeking redemption. But tonight, there was no redemption, only judgment. The elders sat in a semicircle, faces hardened, Bibles open like weapons. Daniel and Amanda entered hand in hand, their silence louder than any defense. He had preached in that church for 12 years. Now he was there to be erased. The lead elder spoke first, his tone rehearsed and cold. "Pastor Daniel," he began, "we have prayed and deliberated. It is the consensus of the board that your marriage to this woman has compromised the purity and testimony of our congregation." Amanda lowered her gaze, her fingers trembling. Each word felt like a verdict. Daniel wanted to speak, but he knew they weren't there to listen. They were there to declare. He stood anyway. "You speak of purity," he said softly, "but you forget that Christ touched the unclean, sat with the outcast, and called the broken his family. If love disqualifies me, then maybe I never understood your version of faith." The room went silent. Some looked away. Others clenched their jaws, unwilling to admit the sting of conviction behind his words. They handed him a letter, formal, impersonal, already printed. It stated that his pastoral credentials were revoked, effective immediately. He was to vacate the parsonage within 7 days. No farewell sermon, no explanation to the congregation, just silence. The kind that follows betrayal, the kind that echoes. Amanda wept quietly as they left. The same people who had once called her a miracle now treated her like a curse. But Daniel didn't cry. Not yet. He walked out of that building as if carrying the weight of every sermon he'd ever preached. On the steps outside, he turned and looked back one last time. "They can take my title," he said under his breath, "but not my calling." As they walked away into the cool night air, the church lights flickered behind them, a sanctuary dimmed by its own blindness. The doors closed, the lock turned, and with it, the chapter of his old life ended. But in that silence, something new was beginning, a faith stripped of institution but still burning with love. The following Sunday, Daniel's absence was impossible to ignore. His chair sat empty on the platform, the pulpit untouched. The elders announced his resignation in carefully chosen words that disguised the truth. They spoke of moral wisdom and spiritual caution, while Amanda's name was never mentioned, as if erasing her could erase the love that had shaken their certainty. But outside those walls, something unexpected began to stir. A few families who had once followed Daniel's sermons with tears now felt the void. They whispered to each other after service, questioning what really happened. Why a man known for compassion was suddenly branded unfit. Some began to seek him quietly, in coffee shops and backyards, hungry for the kind of grace that could no longer be found behind stained glass. Daniel didn't plan to start a new ministry. He only wanted to heal. But when broken people find someone who understands their pain, they come. At first it was 3, then 10, then 50. Addicts, single mothers, divorced men, people the old church had quietly forgotten. They gathered in his living room, sitting on the floor, listening to him speak not from authority but from scars. Amanda would sing softly, her voice trembling but pure. There was no microphone, no spotlight, only candles and honesty. She sang about forgiveness, about a love that doesn't ask for credentials. Every note felt like defiance wrapped in worship. Those who listened felt something they hadn't felt in years, the presence of something holy, unpolished, and real. Meanwhile, the official church began to fracture. Attendance dropped, donations slowed. Some members left entirely, unable to bear the hypocrisy. The elders held emergency meetings, blaming Daniel for dividing the body. But deep down they knew the truth. It wasn't Daniel who divided it. It was their pride. One night, as the new gathering ended, a young man approached Daniel. He had tears in his eyes. "I used to sit in the back of your church," he said. "I thought God hated me because of my past. But now, I think he might still love me." Daniel smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He never stopped," he whispered. In that moment, he realized something. Exile had turned into calling. Amanda often asked if he missed the old church. He'd smile faintly and say, "Sometimes I miss the people, but I don't miss pretending." She understood. They both knew that what they had lost in comfort, they had gained in truth. Their love, once condemned, had become the foundation for something unbreakable. And as weeks turned into months, their home became what the old church never was, a refuge for the unwanted, a place where no one was too far gone to be loved. They called it the Open Table. Daniel didn't choose the name. It just happened, like grace always does. Months passed, and the Open Table grew beyond anything Daniel ever imagined. What began as quiet gatherings in a small living room became a movement of redemption that couldn't be contained. People came from neighboring towns, drawn not by sermons but by stories. Stories of second chances, of broken lives rebuilt through love. It wasn't a church by design, yet it became one by heart. Amanda had found her purpose again. She led recovery meetings every Friday night, welcoming addicts, ex-prisoners, and anyone brave enough to start over. She'd look at them and say, "I know what it feels like to be told you're too dirty for grace. But God isn't afraid of your mess." Her words carried the kind of authority no seminary could teach. One afternoon, Daniel received a letter, handwritten, with the church's seal. His heart tightened as he opened it. It was from one of the elders, the youngest among them, who had been silent during his expulsion. "I've watched from a distance," the letter read, "and I see now that what we called rebellion was actually faith. I was wrong. We all were." The words blurred as Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Weeks later, that same elder showed up at the Open Table. He stood at the doorway, nervous and humbled, surrounded by the very people his church once rejected. Daniel approached him, no anger in his voice, just quiet peace. The man lowered his head and said, "I came to ask for forgiveness." Daniel smiled gently and replied, "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for here. It's something you walk into." The moment spread through the room like a sacred fire. The elder wept openly. Amanda embraced him, and those who watched felt something break, not in pain but in release. For the first time in years, Daniel saw the face of grace not as an idea, but as an act. Messy, raw, and beautiful. That night, as the candles flickered and songs filled the air, Daniel looked around the room, exiles, misfits, outcasts, and now even one of his former judges. This, he thought, is church, not built by rules or power, but by mercy that refused to stay silent. The years passed and the Open Table became more than a sanctuary. It became a beacon. People traveled miles to witness a community built on second chances, where the broken were not judged and love was never questioned. Daniel and Amanda had created something the old church never could, a place where grace was tangible, alive, and unstoppable. Children who once feared judgment now ran freely through the halls, laughing and playing, their parents finding hope in the warmth of the home. Amanda taught them songs of redemption. Daniel told stories of courage. Every small victory was a testament to the power of compassion over condemnation, and every smile proved that love could heal wounds no rules could touch. Former addicts, once shunned and scorned, now led recovery groups, mentoring the next generation of lost souls. Daniel often watched quietly from the corner, feeling pride without ego, knowing that he had never truly saved anyone alone. They had saved each other, guided by the steady light of his unwavering belief in them. News of their work reached far beyond the town, drawing attention from journalists, pastors, and strangers moved by the story. They called it a modern miracle, not because Daniel had a title, but because he had chosen love over fear, action over reputation. And in every article, every photograph, the message was the same. Redemption belongs to everyone. Even some of the elders who once condemned him visited quietly, humbled by the undeniable truth. They watched, listened, and sometimes helped in silence. Daniel never held grudges. Instead, he taught that forgiveness is not weakness, but the courage to see beyond yourself. The very people who tried to silence him now witnessed the strength that love carries. Daniel and Amanda's marriage thrived, not because it was perfect, but because it had been forged in fire. Every challenge they faced, judgment, gossip, expulsion, became a stone in the foundation of their life together. They had chosen each other in defiance of fear, and every day since had been a celebration of grace, resilience, and faith made real through action. At night, when the house was quiet and the children asleep, Daniel and Amanda would sit together by the window reflecting on their journey. They remembered the fear, the whispers, the pain of being cast out. But they also remembered the faces of those they had helped, the lives changed, the hope restored. And in those memories they found a peace the old church could never give. In the end, their story became a legend, not because of scandal, but because of courage. Daniel and Amanda had shown that true faith is measured not by rules or approval, but by the willingness to love without condition. Their home, their lives, and their hearts became living proof that mercy, when acted upon, leaves a legacy far stronger than judgment ever could.